welcome. It's
Hello.
great to have this opportunity to finally meet you in person. We had quite often contact by email, etc. But it's lovely to actually see a face. So we are now at key number 6, which is government. And you wrote an article on actively support UN resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. And I just learned that your name is correctly pronounced, at least in Canada, as Alicia Kuin. Alicia, would you like to tell a little bit about yourself so that we know who wrote this article?
Yeah, thank you so much. And it really is a pleasure to be speaking with you today and doing this interview. So I work as a private practice mediator in Toronto, Canada, as well as a conflict management practitioner for the Director General Alternative Dispute Resolution with the Canadian federal government. So I've got 2 different roles, my private practice role as well as working with the government. In regards to my area of work, I have facilitated almost 700 processes that involve a variety of cases, First Nations, government disputes, human rights, community, workplace, academic disputes. I think that my approach to dispute resolution very much so is rooted within a social justice and anti-oppressive framework. And so I think that approach and that framework is the reason I get hired for some of the cases that I do get retained for. And I'm been kind of known for custom designing processes that meet the specific parties' needs in order to support them in reaching a resolution. I've done quite a bit of international work as well with the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, working alongside a legal defense team with the National Democratic Front of the Philippines. And I guess I've taught and presented all over the world and part of many different organizations. One of the newest ones is Women Mediators Across the Commonwealth, which I'm sure I'll be talking about a little bit more in regards to the article.
Oh, wonderful. So wow, that's an amazing amount of experience here in the room. With all that experience that you have, you wrote the article on a United Nations resolution. What is the core message that you would like to bring across? So how can we get the golden age of mediation really start blossoming?
Yeah, I think so. The title of the article was Actively Supporting United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on Women, Peace and Security. And the critical message of the article is that, Resolution 1325 marks the first time that the United Nations Security Council affirmed the critical role of women in conflict resolution and peace building. And it really calls on governments to adopt a gender perspective when implementing peace agreements, and it stresses the importance of women as full participants in mediation processes. It's, up to member states to, adopt and implement it and devise national action plans. And I think the core message is that over the past 20 years since it has been passed, we haven't seen much of a difference. We've had 8 subsequent resolutions that have, taken place. We are still only at, 3% of the world's mediators for international large-scale processes are only women. And the core message of the article is that this needs to change. It's time to change. And we all play a role in, making that change happen.
Wow, 3%, that is very little, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And also a little bit, it's a missed opportunity, I think, especially given that, and that's also something that you are describing in your article, that there is a link between women's meaningful involvement in these, peace processes and the long-term sustainability. It's difficult for a Dutch person to pronounce that, for the agreements that have been established. And actually you cover a very interesting article that incredibly establishes this with a lot of research and some stats. Would you be willing to tell a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm, appreciative that you looked at some of the sources, because I put a lot of intention in regards to, having the statistics backed up by international research, and there's a ton of international research on this topic that I don't think gets enough attention or the credibility that it does deserve. And one of the articles that you're pointing to says that when women are signatories, agreements have been proven to not only be more durable, but they also contain a greater number of gender and political reform provisions that are implemented at a higher rate. And you can see how that link kind of makes sense, because if you have more women involved in peace processes, well, you are including, the other 50% of the population and their perspective in that agreement and that resolution. So if you're including gender provisions and you're including, political reforms, well, that is involving, the women's perspective and their experience on the ground and how they're impacted by these agreements. And, with mediations, when you're looking at, let's take, commercial cases, the standard saying that you hear is, well, parties have to be part of the resolution because they're more likely to abide by it. If you take that to a larger scale and you're not including women in peace processes, if they're not at the table, if their voices are not represented, well, how can they follow through with these agreements, and how can they, pursue this peace that they weren't a part of? So when you have women included in, larger scale peace processes, those gender provisions are advocated for. Those political changes are advocated for. And because their voices are part of that process, they're also part of implementation on the ground. So I think the link makes sense and kind of speaks to the core of the work that we do as mediators.
Oh, this is fascinating as a conclusion. So how would you see in a perfect world, actually, that this is implemented? If it is the case that when women are involved in these peace processes, how to go about it? Would it be like an opt-out strategy? So all mediation organizations need to say a female mediator is going to be appointed unless explicitly not wanted by the parties. Or do you say there should be a quota, at least half have to be women? Or would you like to go for co-mediation teams, mixed gender? Or in your perfect world, what if you could, make the magic happen here? How would it look like?
Yeah, and I'll answer the question, I think, from two different levels, more so the bird's eye view as well as the mouse and the grassroots perspective. So from the international perspective, the implementation of 1325 really does rest on member states, and the member states are encouraged to develop a national action plan, so a NAP. To determine what the country-specific priorities are, what the government commitments are. And as of right now, out of the United Nations 192 member states, 81 of them have adopted NAPs. So 81 out of the 192. So governments need to not only, say, yes, 1325 is important, but they also need to take the next step and develop national action plans and be accountable on following through on, the reassessment and the full implementation of 1325. Implementing national action plans, demands governments to meaningfully engage diverse voices in society, women-driven civil society, nonprofit, grassroots, dispute resolution bodies, peace builders. If they're going to develop a national action plan, well, they need to engage with the stakeholders. And, 50% of them are women. So meaningful engagement will really inform stakeholders how NAPs can best serve their country specifically. And effective NAPs will help, engage women's groups and ensure that their voices are included. The second piece there is, I think, what we can do as practitioners and mediators, and what we can encourage our colleagues to do and people that are the decision makers. And that is to ensure that, the statistic is that 3% of women are leading these peace processes and about 16% are negotiators. So they're maybe at the table as, advocates or in supportive roles, but they're not in charge of the process. I think that, mediation teams would be better off if they, had more diversity on the teams. I think that would definitely be a starting point. I, strongly encourage my colleagues and, the people in politics that I know to ensure that women are represented, not just in the room, but as the decision makers or as the facilitators of processes. I think it's incredibly important. And I do think, co-gender teams is a good option to go with, and one that I definitely advocate for and have been, fortunate enough to be a part of and seen the benefits of, like I've seen the other women in the room, the parties who come up to me and confide in certain things or want to share certain perspectives that maybe they wouldn't have shared with my male colleagues. So it's really important to, be able to create that connection with parties and ensure that their voices are empowered and heard.
Fantastic. And the 81 countries that have implemented it, do you see that are mainly the countries that are, really widely promote the use of mediation and that are far ahead? Or are there some, surprising candidates where you say, hey, I wouldn't have expected that, but they are really heading in this respect?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you are surprised, by some of the countries. And I think that comes down to some of our own biases. We would assume that, Canada and the United States and countries in Europe would have really strong national action plans. But it's pretty universal for countries all over. I was in Egypt last year, actually doing some work on 1325, and they were in the process of, talking about, national action plans and implementing it. I was in Qatar as well, having conversations around this. So it really is, an array of countries that are implementing it and putting in place.
Nice.
But once again, it does the concern that, I think a lot of us have, and even with Canada's national action plan, is we need to make sure that it's reassessed. So you don't want to put in a national action plan and then leave it as is and have several years pass when you're thinking, well, what's changed in society? How have things changed? How could we improve? How can we do better? So they do need to be reassessed, especially during a time like this with COVID-19 and how women are impacted, in a different way than men are impacted. So we need to have, feminist-driven COVID-19 post-recovery policies. And I'm sure national action plans will have to be updated and changed as well in order to reflect that.
So, there are many different articles that are being published as the 7 keys, and many different things that and angles that you can look on. I assume that you read a couple of the other articles, and was there something that you find very striking or interesting, or say I totally agree or disagree with that? Some of your point of view on that, please.
It's such a hard question to answer because they were all so great. A couple that I think stood out to me there was one titled, I think, Ensure Practices, Reflect Advances in Behavioral Psychology, and that was written by, my dear friend John Sturrock and Tim Hicks. And, I'm big on behavioral psychology. I include it in all of my processes. It's always been a practice of mine. And I think what stood out for me about that article is, once again, during this time in history and COVID-19 and how parties are impacted by that. And I'm noticing how important it is to really explain neuroscience to parties and talk about their physiological reactions. I'm working with a lot of parties who experience trauma, and COVID-19 is a trauma on top of a trauma. And so working with parties and supporting them during this time, because they're already experiencing conflict and having their physiological reactions. So, speaking with them about, well, what does that look like? And, what happens when you become triggered or somebody says something that you disagree with? And when you're working virtually online, you can't see that, leg bouncing under the table or them playing with their pen. So I tend to ask a lot of questions about, well, what will I notice about your shoulders? Or what might your facial expression do? Do your ears go red, or does your, chest go red? How can I be in tune with what's happening? So that the article on behavioral psychology I thought was excellent and probably more timely than ever as a result of where we are right now with COVID-19. Another article that stood out was the chapter on online dispute resolution. And there were some fascinating things in their technologies that, I was just blown away by. There was a program called Kudoway. I might be pronouncing it wrong, but it allows for multilingual online video conferences and provides different language channels. There was, a conversation about AI and its use to triage and aggregate information pertaining to the merits of a case. There was a software called Crystal that can analyze personalities and predict behaviors. So it was fascinating to read about, where this field is going and what the future of mediation can look like. Because as we know, it's going to continue to, rapidly evolve and change as society does.
Exactly, and just imagine if we would have this conversation, and I would have a little screen here saying, "Okay, Alicia likes it very much when you do things like this, or when she is nodding like that, she actually means something else, or she wants you to have a long introduction, or just be brief." It would be great to have those kinds of tools more integrated. And so let's see what the future is bringing. And speaking about the future, what do you see as the next development in our field?
I can say what I would hope to see. So what I would, of course, hope to see is more diversity within the field of mediation. I know that I'm a younger practitioner for the field, and it's the only field I've ever been in. And the people that I looked up to were mainly white males. And I remember my first couple cases putting on, suits and getting all dressed up and not feeling like myself and not seeing people that looked like me. And there are countless other people that, look at the profession, and it is a very privileged profession. So I would love to see the field diversify, whether that means women, Black, people of color, people beyond the binary, seeing a lot more diversity reflected within the field, because the more inclusive we are, the stronger processes will be. And as we already mentioned, they're proven to be more durable as well. So I think diversity is really important. And some of that comes down to mentorship. I think a lot of mentorship and, inclusion in regards to mentorship. I always say to my colleagues, mentor somebody that looks different than you do. You'll learn a lot from them. Mentorship is a two-way street. I can say that myself and my mentor, we've learned as much from each other, and it hasn't just gone one way. So I think that's really important. In regards to the future, I also think of virtual reality. And I think during COVID, people are talking about this Zoom works, you can have processes on Zoom, but what are we missing? That in-person connection. Maybe virtual reality in the future is, augmented reality, that in between where you can still be in your own homes and you can still feel safe health-wise. And you can still have that in-person interaction where you can see that leg bouncing under that table or that person playing with their pen. So I can definitely see it going in that direction, the way technology is moving now, and the capabilities, as well as all the brilliant minds that are in the field and pushing these changes forward.
Awesome. I love to be part of that future of dispute resolution. Is there anything else that you would like to share about your article in general, the 7 keys?
Yeah.
For a couple of minutes.
Maybe one thing that I haven't mentioned yet is in response to 1325 and this focus on women's inclusion in peace processes, is there have been these regional women's networks that have been created all over the world. So there's the Nordic network, there's FemWise, the Mediterranean network, women mediators across the Commonwealth, and right now there's the creation of the Arab Women's Network. Now, the focus of these networks is to have women that work across track 1, 2, and 3 mediation processes. So you've got women that work internationally, nationally, and grassroots. And there's, between 50 and 200 women a part of each network. And the goal is really to have this amazing intergenerational, intercultural exchange. And so I've been fortunate enough to be part of women mediators across the Commonwealth, which has been, an absolute dream and highlight of my past 2 years in the field, because I'm learning from women, that work in Northern Ireland on peace processes, that work on the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan, that, work in Uganda, and what does their work look like on the ground? And all too often, I think in this profession and within most organizations, the United Nations, there tends to be a siloed approach to processes. Mm-hmm. And what we need is more cross-pollination. And these women networks provide an opportunity for different tracks to be cross-pollinated. So if you have something happening on the grassroots and you really need, support or help writing a policy paper or getting the attention of government, well, then the track 1 mediators have some pull, and you can get in touch with them and they can support you with that advocacy and, help navigate or write that paper because they've got that platform. So these women's mediation networks are absolutely incredible. The women are the most inspiring people I've ever met. And so when we're talking about, women, peace, and security, and including more women in peace processes, well, one of the things we can all do is look into these networks and say, there's these talented 50 to 200 people that have been selected, and I need a co-facilitator for a process. Why don't I reach out to one of these networks and, take one of these trained professionals and not just provide them, with this opportunity, but I have an opportunity to learn from them. So it really does, I think, go both ways there, but the networks are wonderful to tap into. So for anybody watching, I strongly encourage you to look into those networks and to learn about some of the incredible women that are, true peace builders.
Yeah, and how to tap into these networks, looking at it online or?
Yeah, so you can research any of them. They also all together fall under something called the Global Alliance of Women Mediation Networks. So you can also look up the Global Alliance. So they've all got, their own presence online. They've got web pages, contact information. We get together several times a year. We do peer-to-peer exchanges. We support one another in peace processes. And it's amazing. I have a colleague that works in Northern Ireland named Sarah Cook, and she focuses on trauma and resiliency. I have a really tough case coming up here in Canada. And so I thought, well, why don't I ask her to co-facilitate with me? So we're actually going to be co-facilitating online using my, human rights background as well as her experience with trauma and resiliency. So it's a wonderful opportunity. I think a lot of mediators work in silos themselves. They tend to work individually or they work alone. And there's such a benefit to co-facilitation and collaboration, not only for your own learning, but for the benefit of the parties. And that's why we're all doing this. So I think it's a wonderful model to use.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing all your insights, Alicia. Been a big pleasure speaking with you, and well, let's say to be continued, huh?
To be continued. Thank you so much.